Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas. Got my trusty co-host with me today, Jeff Rutt. Say hello to the people, Jeff.
Hello to the people.
And we've got a very special guest with us this week, Mike Thakur. He lived in Houston, so I already like him. He's in Atlanta today as we're talking. But, he's a multifaceted guy, CEO and author. There's a Guinness World Records story in there somewhere. We got to work that in, Mike. But Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey, great to be here, guys. Super excited.
Welcome, we won't spend maybe a lot of time on the childhood, but we always try to start there a little bit to get a little bit of context. Jeff, why don't you take us?
Yeah, Mike, welcome to the show. For our listeners, just give us a little context. What was it like growing up in the Thakur household, faith formation, entrepreneurial spirit? What was that family like? Any fun junior high or high school stories that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the UK, grew up in Manchester, which is kind of in the middle if you're looking at a map. And so my dad's from India. He was a Hindu guru, which is like a holy man in India. And so that was an interesting backstory for him. Mom was from Finland. And so they met in the UK and got married. So I'm English raised, but I'm not actually English by blood at all. Lived there all of my life growing up. And then my wife and I moved out here to the US back in officially 2001, I guess, was when we first came here for the long haul. So yeah, it's been a minute. But as far as school in the UK, I don't know. I was pretty serious as a kid. I got saved when I was 9. I think I started preaching when I was like 13 or 14 or something like that in the youth group and stuff. So I always kind of had this sense of I'm supposed to do something for the kingdom, but didn't really know how else to interpret that other than, well, it must mean ministry, right? Because that's what you've got in the 80s. And no internet, no way of knowing what everybody else is thinking about these things. And so chased Bible college and vocational ministry officially, for a little while, then realized that was not at all what I was cut out to do. So, that was the early years of Mike, I think.
Awesome. Any entrepreneurial experiments growing up? If not, take us into meeting your wife and just school and what that looked like.
I think as a teenager, I had glimpses of being entrepreneurial, but I didn't know enough to know that that's what it was. I had two parents who were not culturally, savvy at all, obviously from different cultures growing up. And so, navigating that just wasn't something that I had anybody around me that could help me with. And I didn't know at the time that that's what that was. And so, I finished school when I was 16. I went to work at McDonald's. Flipping burgers for a couple of years was fun while I tried to figure out who I wanted to be. And I met my wife when I was about 19, and we actually went to Bible college together. So we met and fell in love, as the cliche would go. And then the following year, we went to Bible college and studied theology for 3 years together. And that was kind of the early start of life for us. She's got a heart for God as well. And we came out of college. We were supposed to actually come back to Nashville. Interestingly enough, we'd been in Nashville for 3 months during our college years, working with a program here called Teen Challenge, which is an outstanding substance rehabilitation program. And then had some issues with visas, didn't work out. So, I went out to work. She went out to become a high school teacher. And we figured that, our journey would look a little different. And it did. So, yeah.
That's crazy. Where did you go to Bible college?
So we went to the official Assembly of God College in the UK, which at the time was in a little village called Mattersea. And when I say a little village, I mean, I don't know that there was 50 houses there. It was literally the middle of nowhere. So no cell phone, no internet. It was just becoming a thing. And man, they made sure you were focused on spiritual things or not really a whole lot else. So, it apparently worked.
It apparently worked. Well, that's an amazing story. So how did you get to the US? It sounds like, did you get kicked out for a while and then had to re-enter? How did you kind of stabilize in the US?
Yeah, no. So we came for 3 months between years 2 and 3. Had a blast. We wanted to come back. They wanted us to come back. We applied for the visas and things. Just figured it was a formality. And I guess someone made a mistake on some paperwork and rejected us when they shouldn't have. We didn't know any better, and we didn't have an immigration lawyer or anything like that with us. So we just went out and did life. And a few years later, a friend of ours was actually out here and working at a church, and he connected us with someone else who was looking for a youth pastor. And we said, well, hey, okay, maybe God's in this. We'll just push on that door again, and we'll try a second time. And this time we did have an immigration lawyer, and didn't know mistakes were made, and everything went through as it was supposed to. And so we flew out here, and we were here for a couple of years. We did the church thing, and when my wife was actually pregnant with our oldest, we went back to the UK and thought, that's probably the end of that, and settled back into life there. I went back into the marketplace. I'd done pretty well previously in life. I worked for a large IT reseller, and so I went back to work for them when they heard I was coming back. They kind of had a job waiting for me, so that was nice.
Yeah.
And I spent a few more years there. We sold high-end IT solutions to government clients. So we did about 100 million or so dollars a year, my sales teams at the time. And yeah, life was pretty good for, a 20-something-year-old kid with one baby and, settling back down over there.
You don't hear that very often where
No.
somebody's able to kind of bridge both of those worlds very successfully. I think a lot of pastors or sort of struggle to kind of make that shift. It sounded like it was pretty natural for you, or does it just sound natural? It wasn't. I mean, what was that tension like between business world and church and trying to live an integrated life? Is that something you sort of woke up to, or did you think, oh gosh darn, I got to go into the business world to support my family? Was that sort of and I'm going to have to sacrifice my ministry? Is that where some of these thoughts you have about integrated life came from?
Yeah, I think at the time, again, I'm late 20s, and so we probably wrestled very much with this idea of, it felt like we'd failed in ministry. We've gone backwards back to the country that we left. Now I'm back working at a company I'd worked at before. So there was definitely this sense of like everything's gone backwards and nothing's really worked the way we wanted it to. Like we wanted to serve God. We wanted to do something for kingdom. It's all we ever wanted. And at the time, obviously, I had no idea about anything like, kingdom business or fusing business and mission together and all the things that we now talk about, much more freely, I think, in this day and age. And it was hard. And I don't think I was really formulating ideas at that point. I think I was really trying to figure out how to make life work.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I saw some success professionally and, was pretty good at what I did. But even with that, there was absolutely this feeling of, hey, like we're completely missing it. And so, when the opportunity came up that we could come back to the US a few years later, it wasn't even a decision to have to make to say, okay, I'm gonna leave this here, and I'm gonna go take this job now as at a church that doesn't necessarily even need somebody, but they think they're hearing from God and that we're hearing from God and that He's got something in store for us to do in the US. And we're going to go make less money in a year than I used to make in a few weeks. But it just didn't matter because we still at the time had this wrong mentality of the only way to serve God truly is through, a full-time formal ministry type setting.
Right.
And I think that put us back a lot, honestly. I think in hindsight, if I'd had people around me like you guys, like a lot of the other voices out there now talking about doing things differently, I think life would have looked very different for me and for Linda, but we didn't. So we did the best we could.
But clearly you figured it out at some point because you kind of moved back to the business world too. So take us through that timeline a little bit. So you moved to the US, you're working for a church. How long did that go before you started doing something kind of on the for-profit side?
So before you go into that, can you drop in what's the title of your book? Because we're going to come to this later, but if somebody's listening, I want them to listen long enough to hear about your book and some of the principles that you put a lot of thought and experience and into and learned kind of the school of hard knocks. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons we exist as the Generous Business Owners Podcast is to help folks along that journey that are, a little bit different stage of the journey. But what's the title of your book? We're going to drop in the show notes. What's it about? And then I'll let you pick up where you were on your journey.
Yeah, so the book's called Mic Drop, MIKE, obviously after my name. Tagline is do business God's way, live like a king, change the world. So you can go find it on Amazon real easy.
We'll put that in the show notes. Just the title alone is like, I want to go read this, Jeff.
Okay, let's go back to the timeline. So you're working for the church, and then how do we get back in the business world?
So 2007, we come back to the US. So now I've got my son who is almost 4 years old. We've got a daughter who's 6 months old. And we feel like God's saying, hey, we're not finished over here. So, we pack up a second time, sell everything and we move out here. We actually came back to the original church we worked at before. They didn't know what they were going to do with us. We didn't really know what we were going to do for them. We just both felt like God was in this. And so we were with them for a few months, and an opportunity came up at a different church across town. And so I was a children's pastor, which still makes a lot of people laugh, but nevertheless, I was. And we went to this church and we were there for, I don't know, I think through about 2010, and got to really enjoy American church politics firsthand for 3 years, which was awesome. And as soon as we could, it was an interesting time. So we were vastly underpaid. By the end of it, we were on food stamps. And so I picked up a weekend job at the Apple store. So I was working 5 days at church. I was working 3 days at Apple. And then I also started some web consulting on the side as well. My first business in the UK had been web and internet marketing back in the late 90s. And so I was doing these three things, trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? And so I remember there was this day when we couldn't pay the mortgage, and never been in that situation in my life. Always been very, very mature for my age, quite a serious thinker, always been very cautious. And so we had to borrow money from a line of credit to make the mortgage payment of like $700 or something. Like, it wasn't a whole lot of money. And I think that was the moment for me where I sat down with Linda and I said, look, we want to do something for Jesus, right? But this isn't working. Yeah. It's just not working. Like, we're not supposed to live like this. I can't function doing three different things. We shouldn't not be able to make a mortgage payment. So something has to change. And, we've got all this drama going on at church, and all the politics and all the usual things that happen. So I don't want to get into all that. And so we decided to step down from there and figure out, okay, well, what do we do now then? And so work was the only thing that I knew how to do. And it was really interesting because while I was at the Apple store, a guy came in one day looking for a computer, and so I was helping him, and I sold him the computer. We got talking. And it turned out they needed some help with some internet type stuff, some web stuff. And I said, well, hey, you know what? As it happens, I used to run a company that did this. Like, I can probably help. And so I went and took care of whatever the issue was. And then he had me help him with something else, and I helped him with something else. And it took a probably 3 or 4 month period before one day we had a conversation. And he said, well, do you want to come work for me? Like, I need someone that can do this. Can you do that? And I said, well, I'm relatively intelligent. I don't see why not. Like, how hard can it be? And so that was actually Mike Guidry, okay, who, Jeff Thomas. Yeah. And I spent 5 years working at the Guidry Group, and eventually was chief operating officer there by the time I finished. And they were nicknamed the Secret Service for billionaires, for people who don't know who they are. So they specialize in high-end security and kidnap, ransom, extortion, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think it was at that time where I heard a podcast, and it was a guy from Bethel, and he was talking about the students that come in and see him. And everybody wants to know, like, how do I know God's will for my life, right? Great question. I'm still trying to figure this out. But anyway, I listened to this podcast, and he said, I always tell every student the same thing when they come and see me, and they ask me this question. So I'm sitting there like wide open ears. Okay, right. Tell me, like, what's going on? Because again, I'm wrestling with this. We came back to America to serve God, to be in ministry. Here I am just working a regular job. It just didn't make sense. And he said, I tell them to follow the favor. And I always remember these words because I had a long conversation with Linda about it that day. And I said, okay, Linda, if we look back on life, like where is the favor and where isn't it? And it seemed that every time we tried the ministry thing, it just created problems. Yeah. But every time I'd been involved in marketplace and business and in whatever, as an employee running my own business, it seemed like it had been relatively successful. And so I said, okay, if that's where the favor is, then that's where we should lean into. And I don't know what that looks like. But then as we started to noodle on this thought journey, we started to think about, what if we could start a business and we could actually use it to fund a nonprofit?
Right.
So we could just go do whatever we want. And no one has to get involved. I don't need to ask anybody's permission. I don't need to ask anybody for donations. I don't need to ask anybody for anything. We just go do it if we think that that's what God wants us to do. And so we had this idea for an office space business, and co-working wasn't a thing, back in 2012, 2013, when we started to think about this. But I'd gone out to try and find an office to work from because I didn't like being at home on my own. And the only one I could find was it was just ugly. I mean, it was just awful. It's not the kind of place you want to work out of at all. And so, my experience of working for a large $8 billion company in the UK, having a great campus to go into every day, being around people, I started to think, well, if I'm a small business guy on my own, like, why can't I have those same things by scaling this and sharing it with other people? And so we created Work Lodge, which is the co-working business. We created our nonprofit called Hope Economy at the same time. And the goal was, we'll start a business and we'll take some of the profits we make, maybe a lot of the profits, depending on how we're doing, and we'll just use them for Jesus. And that's the end of that. And so that's what we've done for 10 years. And it's been pretty awesome.
That's so amazing I love that line that you still repeat, but follow the favor.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like necessarily, I guess at the same time, it's still, business as ministry wasn't really a phrase.
Right.
I don't think. It seems like that's something that's more in the last 10 years has been used, but it still connected those dots,
Yeah.
right? So, but were you still thinking the business was like just a funding mechanism? It wasn't ministry itself? Have you kind of evolved into thinking that the business is actually part of the ministry as well, not just the fruit from the...
Yeah. So the way that we structured it and the way that we tried to set it up was to think in terms of both. So you've got this nonprofit that can go and do these cool kind of projects, whether it's water wells, children's homes, feeding programs, whatever. But then you've got the business, and it's like a case of, okay, well, but how do we do business? And so, when we started to structure staff training, core values, all those kind of things, we took biblical principles and then shaped who we wanted to be culturally from those principles. I'm not saying I've always done a great job with it, but that was the heart and that was the goal, so that we would treat people the way we want to be treated, right? We would, treat someone else the way that we would expect that we would get treated if we were in their shoes. So yes, we've definitely tried to approach being kingdom minded in two different veins, but they are distinctly different, because one vein is a paying customer, and there is still a transactional, relationship happening here. They are, exchanging money for something from us, and we've got to be able to deliver that. But the way we can treat them and the way that we can interact with them outside of the transaction, we definitely have wanted to be different. And I've definitely tried to train that difference in the staff that we've had. But that is a little bit more nuanced than the nonprofit side, where it can function a little bit more just impact driven,
Sure, but it could be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't have to like run the business in a totally secular manner the way everybody else does, and then just use the profits. You're trying to use those principles in the business. Are you still running that business? I know you won a most admired CEO award in Houston in 21. Was that from that business, and does that business still exist?
Yeah, so it was from that business, and yes, it does still exist. And I'm flying there tomorrow, so I fly back to Houston very regularly, and yeah, that's still my baby. 10 years in June, so it's been a minute.
What took you to Nashville?
It was a funny thing. I just felt unsettled. That's probably the best way to say it in Houston, and started to feel like, hey, we've lived here in America for nearly 20 years. We've only ever lived in Houston, Texas. What if we would like living somewhere else? What would that look like? And could we make that work? And so we thought about it, we prayed about it. And we came out here a few times and didn't feel a no, on a spiritual level. And so we came out with the kids, and we were doing a little house shopping. And then we were looking at some homes one day, and this burned down mansion came up, and it seemed like it'd be a fun project. So we thought, why not? We'll go.
Okay, now the burned down mansion is all over the internet, man. You gotta tell this story. Talk about a comeback story. Okay, what is the story with this mansion?
Look, I can't make this stuff up, right? So we were scheduled to fly on Thursday morning, right? Yeah. Thursday we were looking at houses in Brentwood. Friday we were looking at houses in Franklin with the kids. So family trip. Right. Wednesday morning, my wife gets an email from Zillow and says, new houses on the market today. And in this list is this house, and the listing picture, it literally has the house on fire. And it's a burned down house. And it says, nothing is reusable. The foundation might be okay, kind of a thing.
Right.
And so she sends me this text at like 6:30 in the morning, and I'm sat downstairs, I'm having my quiet time, and I see this thing come through. I think, well, we're going to be there anyway. Let's go take a look at it, right? How bad can it be? So I forwarded it to my realtor. I said, hey, just add this to the list, like no big deal. So Thursday we're out goofing around in Brentwood, and we sat down in the Airbnb at night, and it's been a disaster of a day. Like, the houses have been terrible. We're not feeling anything about anything. And we're sat there thinking, okay, maybe we'll just stay in Houston. Like, maybe this just isn't supposed to work.
Wasn't supposed to be.
So my son, who's now 20, so I guess he was 19, he walks in the room and he's got his phone in his hand and he says, Dad, is this the house we're going to look at tomorrow? And literally this thing has gone viral on Zillow Gone Wild on Thursday afternoon. It's like 400,000 views in a few hours and just climbing. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my word, like I thought we might get a bargain here.
Right.
And now it's got all these eyeballs, So I called my realtor and I said, Sam, you need to get us to that house first in the morning and not last at the end of the day. I think there's going to be a little bit of interest. By the time we get there Friday morning, I think he's had 4 offers and he's turned them all down. The price has now gone up above asking price.
Oh boy.
Someone's flying in from out of state to buy this thing on Friday evening. And there's supposed to be a second person viewing at the same time we're viewing. The guy that meets us at the house is actually the owner, not the listing agent. It's his wife who listed it. And thankfully, the second folks never show up. So we look around and we walk around and literally just have a family meeting out there on the driveway. And I said, look, if we're thinking at all that God might be in us moving here, like this would be a really fun thing to do. We don't really have a reason for moving, but this would give us one.
Project.
Are we in it or are we not? Because if we don't buy this right now, it will not be here in a few hours,
Yeah.
And so we all agreed that it felt like, it could be a God card. And so I went and negotiated with the seller and, we figured out something that we could both live with and we signed a contract 30 minutes later.
Wow.
Yeah. And now how did this play out? How long ago was that? And how has this played out so far?
Yeah. So it was January of 23. So we closed 4 weeks later, and March 1st, me and my son moved out here, and we started work on the house. And obviously we've vlogged it, so you can watch it on YouTube. Just search Burn Down Mansion. We're the only one that comes up.
What you really bought was that title. What you really bought was that title, Mike.
That's exactly what it was.
It had zero to do with the real estate value.
The URL, Jeff. That's right.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's been good. We finished the house earlier this year. We moved in. It's on the market now. So, we'll see what it sells for, but we'll do okay out of it. And it was a fun project to be involved in. It was really fun for me. I definitely have a little bit of creativity on interior design and that kind of stuff. I built the 2 co-working spaces that we have and some other ones as well. And, I enjoy that part of the process of construction and design and layout. So it was nice to give me something else to think about for a little while. And yeah, it's all finished now, and I'm here filming in my studio down in the lower level. So
that's awesome. Well, we will put that link in the show notes as well. If it's not sold by the time this airs, check it out.
Anybody's looking for a nice house in the Nashville area, come talk to me. Okay.
It's a hot town, literally, especially after those still burning. Okay, now you do have a pretty amazing sort of online presence. And you've written this book. I know we need to get back to the book, Mic Drop. So obviously you've got kind of a pastor's heart also. You've got these sort of unique business and creativity skills and design. You're sort of a Renaissance man, it sounds like to me. But talk about, you obviously feel called to speak to the community about this sort of combination of, work and faith. Talk a little more about the book and what are the principles out of the book and what are you trying to get across there?
Yeah, I think the book came from a heart of, as I look back over my life and thought, if there'd been someone around me to say, Mike, there's a different way that you can make an impact for Jesus.
Yes.
I think my journey would have been different. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I live with regret, but now we're in a time where communication and conversation happens, a lot easier.
Yes.
And so I wanted to throw my voice in the ring, selfishly, because I wanted to meet some other people who thought the same. And I was having a hard time making friends like that. And so I figured, well, if I write a book about kingdom and mission, hopefully some other kingdom mission folks are going to read it and get in touch. And then I can build a friend circle of other people who really are interested in using their business for kingdom impact and not just buy another boat or another car, because I don't really have a whole lot of time for that. And so that's where the book came from. I think, the goal of the book really is to help entrepreneurs understand that the primary way that God designed impact in the world was not through organized religion, but it was actually through business and through entrepreneurship. And I prove this from Genesis 1 right the way through. It gets a little bit theological in places, but it's absolutely there. The thread's all the way through. And you only have to look at someone like Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, and ask yourself, why would he stop writing and go stand in the marketplace and make tents when he could have written more to create a bigger New Testament that would have helped all of us for the rest of time? Yet he thought it was more valuable to go and run a business and to use the profits of that business to fund his ministry and his entire team that went with him, and to put himself in the marketplace where people are, where he could touch them and impact them and influence them. There's just an incredible lesson just in his life alone, but you see this all the way through scripture. And so, really the heart is, we've got a lot of Christian business guys out there who run their businesses like everyone else in the world. And we need them to stop doing that. And we need them to change and recognize we are called to run our businesses differently. We are called to let God be the head of our business. We're called to have an actual faith walk that involves talking to him and including him in business and developing that prayer life that goes with that. And ultimately, we're called to use those businesses to go touch people who need some help. I don't think Matthew 25 was a joke. I don't think Jesus was kidding when he said, somebody's thirsty, give them something to drink. Somebody's hungry, give them something to eat. If you have a business that generates profit, you are primarily positioned to be able to impact people in situations like that beyond anybody else. And so I think there's a very direct, clear call that is an expectation that God has on your business. And if you are not doing those things through your business, you are not just failing at living out your purpose. I think you're actually being intentionally disobedient against the call that God placed on your lives, which is a harsh thing to say. But look, this is the scripture says it. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. Okay, so take it up with him, don't take it up with me.
Well, I think two really important things you said there. I think in your life is really a great case study for this, which is sort of your strong desire, even, came to faith so young and going to Bible college with your to-be wife. And, you want so badly to serve. And when you would go to the business world, there'd be great success. And when you would actually go to the church, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I kind of love that story because it was like God is screaming at you.
Yeah.
The call to ministry does not need to be in the four walls of a church.
Yeah.
For some people, that's a wonderful place to serve, or Hope International, or some other nonprofit. That is a great place to serve. But 90% of us aren't going to serve there. We are going to serve in business. And he obviously gave you favor in business. Okay. So that's number one, right? Is be willing, open your mind to the calling that might be beyond a nonprofit entity. And then the second thing I heard was, okay, now that you're in business, what are you in it for? What is the purpose? How do you treat the people? How do you use the profits? How do you be a blessing? How is this a platform for blessing? Are we on the right track? How would you put a bow on that or expand that thought?
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right on. Yeah, for sure. And I think that, the biggest thing of all, beyond everything else we're even talking about, is just for the kingdom entrepreneur or the Christian business owner, whatever you want to call them. Ultimately, if you can get to a place where you see the business as a vehicle for kingdom impact, and then you allow the business to be used for kingdom impact, which means you're going to make less money because Jesus is going to make more. What actually happens is that's when you live your best life. Mm-hmm. So selfishly, if you just want to live the most fulfilling life possible, the way to do that is to let God have your business and use it for his impact. Even though it's actually doing lots of good things for other people, that's how you end up being able to have the walk you were supposed to have, because that's what you were designed to do in the first place. That's when we get proximity to Jesus. It's how we get closer. because now we're having to listen to him for guidance more and more, and having to listen to him to speak more and more for us to make the good decisions and avoid the bad decisions. So it's almost like, we selfishly benefit from doing the right thing, which kind of sounds icky, but we do. So it's, to me, again, why would you not want that?
Well, it's the paradox of faith anyway, right? It's the world, but it is the opposite of what the world tells us to do. The world tells us that the person with the most toys wins.
Yeah.
And yet, one of my favorite lines is, everybody knows that money can't buy happiness, but everybody wants to find out for themselves.
Yeah.
So even if you make a gazillion dollars and you try to buy all the toys, at some point it stops satisfying, right? And the only true satisfaction is to live the way we were designed to live, which is to be other-centered, the way Christ lives his life, to emulate, right? But it's such a narrow road. Why do you think it's such a broad road to the consumption and such a narrow road to this kind of living? Why is that, Mike?
I mean, human greed, selfishness. I mean, I guess, now we're into all the cliches, right? But noise, I think, is some of it. And I think for the next generation, especially, I look at my kids, I've got, soon to be 21 and a couple of other teenagers. And there's so much now on social media and those kind of things. And especially on an entrepreneurial level, it's just reinforcing that wrong message, right? It's all about me. It's all about my benefit. It's the flashy cars, it's the flashy house, it's whatever. And that is really having such an impact on the evolving mindset of this generation. And there isn't enough to combat that. There isn't enough of the alternative, because it doesn't sound as great to say, no, forget the flashy cars. You can drive a Honda or a Ford or a Toyota, because it's more important that those kids over there have clean water. And I think that is actually a great message, and that would excite me. There's not a whole lot of it out there, and we need more of it out there, because they need to hear the other side of this. We have to make sure we don't lose that generation to the voice of social media, particularly in the realm of entrepreneurship and business. And I even hear, folks who throw the Jesus card out, but they still spout all the other stuff just the same as everybody else who doesn't have the Jesus card. And for me, that's really heartbreaking, because it's just showing that you haven't grasped it yet. You haven't made the connection and gotten to the place you need to get to, but you've got a voice and you're speaking into the lives of other people. It's just incomplete, and it needs to evolve like really quickly, so that you can get to a place where your voice is actually saying a better message and helping shape them in a better way, so that they can then grow to become who they need to become for kingdom. Which again, right now, I think is a real pressure point for us.
Well, I mean, we're recording this literally the week after Jake Paul fought Mike Tyson over the weekend, who's essentially an internet sensation.
Yeah.
Who, when I pulled up, I didn't watch the fight, but I saw afterwards, I was just curious who won. And there were all these videos of Jake showing off his new house or whatever, with the cars and and all of that. And, we're not against all, God gives it to us to enjoy as well, but it's also about clearly the other-centric piece is where the joy actually comes from. So by releasing these things that we could spend on ourselves, that's the paradox, right? As we actually get what we want, that satisfaction by giving it away. It's just not the way the world operates. And I love that you're trying to motivate others. What are the other ways you try to get this story out beyond your the book?
So, sometimes I'll speak to folks. Zoom's been a great tool as well for some of this stuff, but groups who are kingdom minded, business folks, or, kingdom focused entrepreneurs. And that's been fun, as well as helped me to make some more friends, which I always like, especially in those circles. But it's also just been an easy way to be able to connect. Now, technology's just changed so much.
Yeah.
And so it opens up so many more effortless ways, to be able to connect and communicate with other people and have conversations. I do get people reach out, relatively regularly now, thankfully, because of the book, because of the content that goes out and that kind of stuff. And so I'm able to have one-on-one conversations as well. I think our audience is naturally a little bit smaller, because it's kingdom, entrepreneurship and that kind of stuff. But
I think you've done a great job building a little community there. I just tip my cap to you on that. And Now, before we get to kind of our final question about a practical tip,
Yeah.
you got to give us just a couple of minutes on this world record thing. What is the deal with okay? Come on, we got to hear this Guinness World Record deal.
Yeah, so I started podcasting back in 2020, and so I was involved with an online podcasting conference because people couldn't meet in person, with the pandemic and everything. And so the first year that they held it, I was one of the speakers, and I guess it was a Guinness World Record for the amount of people that attended. And so I got a little participation certificate, for being in that. And then in the next year they did it again, and I was one of the speakers again. So I got another one. So I figured, you know what, I'll take my pat on the back. It's not my name that's on the world record, but I was at least one little gear in the machine that turned, and it felt good. Yeah.
I just
There
think
you go.
that speaks to hey, listen, man, you've got some favor in the way you're communicating, and so lean into it. I think
Yes. So before you get to that's awesome. Hey, and vicariously, we get to be a part of that Guinness Book of World Records by hosting you on the show.
There you go.
So, two quick comments. I just listened to, and I sent it to Jeff. John Piper's going back to 2000, famous "Don't Waste Your Life" talk to a group of college campus residents who talked, and he talked about the contrast of the two women in their 80s who had just been killed. The brakes went out in their car in the mission field. I think they were in, where were they, Jeff? They were somewhere in the mission field, killed instantly. And he talks about, what a tragedy. However, he compared it to some of the folks who he was accustomed to, he was familiar with, who had kind of checked out when they were 60, went to play golf in South Florida, collected shells. They were really proud of the shell collection that they had put together. And he said, no, that's the tragedy.
Right.
Talk about, a waste of a season of life. And he said, thinking about their entry into heaven and saying, Lord, look at my shell collection. Isn't it amazing? And so nothing against shells, nothing against Florida, nothing against, improving that golf swing. But what is really important? What's really, what's the why behind it? What's the purpose? What is what's really, really important? So talk about that, but also combine it with, and I think you just touched on a couple of these, Billy Graham, one of the last things he really talked about focusing on is saying that the marketplace, the business world is the next frontier for evangelism. Yeah. So just comment on those two things before you go into your best tip.
Yeah, I think, for the first part, activity, right? So the Bible says, faith without action is dead, basically. I think James talks about this, who was Jesus' brother. And I think sometimes we understand that to mean activity and action is what proves our faith. But in actual fact, and this is a nuance, but in actual fact, I don't think that's what it's saying. I think what it's trying to communicate is when our faith takes us to a closeness in our faith walk with Jesus, it drives activity. Mm-hmm. So it's not that the activity is what's proving our faith. It's that the activity is the outworking and the outward visible evidence of the faith that we have in our walk with Jesus. Because when we're really close with Jesus, when we care about the things Jesus cares about and we see injustice, we will naturally want to do something to fix it because we know it bothers him. Like, I don't need Jesus to tell me if somebody has no food to eat, I should help them have something to eat if I'm in a position to do that. Because one, the Bible's already told me that. And two, even if the Bible hadn't told me that, it did tell me to love other people the way I would want to be loved back. And if I had no food to eat, I would hope somebody would help me. Mm-hmm. So when the things that bother Jesus' heart bother my heart, my role now is to go and do something about it. But as a business owner, I've got a little bit more resource to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think activity is the thing that I would focus on there. Mm-hmm. And then I've forgotten your second question.
The Billy Graham evangelism via the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more we're hearing now. So many people say the marketplace is where the next move of God's going to be. The marketplace is where it's at. And just practically, I don't even think you need to be that prophetic to say that. I mean, let's be realistic.
Right.
People work in a job 5 days a week.
That's
You
where
know, they
they
go to
are.
church for an hour and a half,
Right.
right? So if you're a Christian business owner, you've got 40 plus hours a week where you can shape the way you do business. You can shape the way you train your staff, the way you interact with your staff, the way that you communicate with your staff, the way that you help your staff when they're having difficulties, whatever it is. Like, it's infinitely more time on any given week, on any given month, on any given year. And again, we're not perfect. We don't get this right every time, but like, holy moly, at least try. I mean, at least try and do better. At least
Mm,
try and be different. And that's a
mm,
start, you know, and then
mm,
find people to help you, you know,
mhm,
find groups of other people like you, kingdom
mhm,
minded entrepreneurs, and between yourselves, figure out how to do it better and better and better until we get to a point. People should say, I want to go work for this company because I know that that company is based on Christian principles.
mhm,
And I know that for me as an employee, that's better for me selfishly.
Right.
mhm,
Like, forget everything else. That's where we should be in the world. We should be the magnet that draws people in, but we don't. What we have is people say, I don't want to go work for a Christian because I know what Christian people are like.
mm,
Oh,
And
wow.
unfortunately, you know, I've seen that for myself. You know, I'm in the co-working business. We have a lot of companies that come and go. Some of them are Christians and some of them aren't. And, you know, and my staff see that as well. And that's been a hard thing for us to try and navigate and
mm,
circumvent when they see people do the wrong thing and then say to me, oh, well, that's one of those Christians, right? Because
mhm,
most of my team aren't Christians. And
mm,
so that's very frustrating and it's very humbling at the same time. And we just got to do better. Like,
mhm,
look, this isn't me telling anybody else off. Like, we're in this
mhm,
together. We're all on Team Jesus. Let's just do better. Like, let's
mhm.
just do better.
Amen.
Well, I
Amen.
think down that road, let's go ahead and kind of get to that. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. And so, for somebody who is doing that, let's say they're running on the treadmill, listen to this. You know, um, they are a believer, they're running a company, it's going pretty well, but they're kind of deciding how hard to lean into this approach you're talking about. What's just a practical tip they can move toward tomorrow that you'd share with them?
Yeah, I think there's two tips I'd probably leave folks with. I think first of all, I'd say um, lean in harder. You
Hmm.
know, don't get distracted, don't get frustrated. The Bible says don't get weary about doing good. And it's such
Mm,
a strange thing to say.
Hmm.
Like, it really is. But I
It
got to
is.
tell you, in my own life, some days I wake up just tired of it. And it's not
mm,
that I do that much good, right? Like, I'm just a little guy with a little business. We do a few little things here and there. Like, that's it. But sometimes it's just exhausting trying to figure some of this stuff out, trying to fix problems that no one else has figured out. But I think it bothers Jesus, so I want it to bother me, and so I want to try and find a solution to fix it. So I think, apply that to yourself, on the business side of things. Don't don't get frustrated, when you can't find the solution you're looking for, but lean in harder. And I think tied to that would be, surrounding yourself with other people who think the same way.
mm,
There's lots of entrepreneurial groups out there. There's lots of even kingdom entrepreneur groups out there. What I struggle to find, and again, one of the reasons I wrote the book and one of the reasons I like to make friends with people who think the same way is because most most Christian entrepreneur groups essentially exist to do the same thing that non-Christian entrepreneur groups do, which is let's get together, let's talk about business, and between us, we'll all grow and do better in how we do business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. You obviously have to grow a business to be successful. Where I step in is the next level and say, okay, I'm going to assume you've figured out how to do business and how to grow your business and how to manage your business. I don't want to have conversations around that. I want to have conversations around what does God want now? Now that you've got the baseline figured out, let's look at your calling. Let's look at your purpose. Let's look at how that business can touch the world and change it. So, for example, we're working on a project right now in Uganda. I'm not sure if it's going to come off or not, but we think it will. We were asked to go out there and build a vocational institute. It's about 29 buildings. It's about $3 million, a little bit more than I've got. So this will be the first time in 10 years, probably, that we have actively looked at a project that we can't just write the check on and take care of. And I wrestle with this, and I talk to God about it more than once because it's outside of my comfort zone. I don't want to have to rely on someone else. I don't want to have to ask for money because we haven't done that, and I don't want to do that. And it was funny because I was talking to a good friend of mine. I say good friend of mine. She might not think she's a good friend of mine, but I think she's a good friend of mine. and she's pretty wise. And she said, Mike, have you ever wondered that maybe the reason that God's nudging you this way is because you've been too self-sufficient, and maybe it's time for you to stop being so selfish and bring some other folks along for the ride. And I just never thought about it in those terms, because I've reacted so much against what you see so often.
Yeah.
Hey, let's go spend some more money. Now you give me the money so I can go spend it. We never wanted to do that. We wanted to build a business that could fund the things we wanted to be able to do. But it was a really interesting perspective. And so it's challenged me a lot to think about how we would handle this project, how we would approach it, whether we would even take it on or not. And then if we do, where's God going to show up in all this? Because that's a big step of faith. When you've got another country and other people relying on you to do what you say you're going to do, but you don't know how you're actually going to do it. And that's just the reality of just one of the things I'm walking through right now. I don't have an answer for you. I'm just telling you what I got going on.
Wow. Mike, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it? I know you've got a pretty good online presence, but what would you suggest is the best way to connect?
Just the website, probably mikethakur.com. That points to everywhere. So, you can find my socials and all that kind of stuff from there.
We'll put it in the show notes. And I think these are just great practical tips. Just lean in harder and surround yourself with people who'll kind of give you the right kind of advice and maybe point out some blind spots and maybe even lift your sights a bit.
Amen.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Jeff Rutt, thanks for being with us. Mike, thank you so much for being with us this week. Just fantastic to have you on.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. And thanks everybody for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner podcast. Share it with a friend. Follow us.
Mic drop.
And mic drop. Yeah. Get the book, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, folks.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.